So I'm going to begin today with a reading from Unitarian Universalist Doug Mooter. I made a typo in my notes here. I have Doug Murder. Spell check was not helpful there. But this is his writings on the first principle of Unitarian Universalism, which is our topic for today. The recent years of American politics have changed many of my most cherished beliefs and attitudes. My faith in democracy and the wisdom of the people, my bias towards optimism, and what I now see as my complacency about the stability of the American Republic. This period has challenged, perhaps above all, a key part of my religious identity, how I practice the Unitarian Universalist first principle. Like all of the UU principles, the first one, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, is a lot easier to believe than to practice. As an abstraction, it is hard to deny, but seriously attempting to respect something worthy and dignified in each person you happen across, the boss who just fired you, the teacher who is unfair to your child, that is much harder. It's particularly difficult in the us against them world of politics. As our political conversation becomes ever more negative and partisan, it gets harder and harder. I have become nostalgic for the first principle arguments I used to lead or participate in. Did Hitler have worth and dignity, someone was bound to ask? And then we would have a safely theoretical discussion of evil long dead. Yes, I would ultimately answer and feel quite proud of my intellectual courage. But in this era, the Nazis are not theoretical, if they ever really were. As current events chip away at my first principle practices, I have to wonder, is my faith just losing the fat built up by decades of comfortable living? Or is this a steady erosion that will ultimately leave me with no real principle at all? For now, I choose to believe I will eventually reach a solid core, a fighting trim, if I follow the metaphor. As a Universalist, I still nurture the hope that no one is beyond redemption, no matter how unlikely and miraculous that event might seem in some cases. To the extent we can do so without endangering the innocent, we should always leave room for redemption. To pursue it, we should even be willing to risk some of our own safety. But I lack any clear rules defining exactly how much I should risk myself, which I fear leaves me open to further erosion. When evildoers have been subdued and no longer pose a threat, I hope that I will take no joy in their suffering. I believe in self-defense and in the value of punishment as a deterrent, but these are necessary evils. Suffering, I still believe, is never good in itself, no matter what the sufferer has done in the past. So I still have first principle beliefs, but they seem far less magnanimous and courageous than the ones I am used to. What I like about this reading is its emotional honesty. It's about someone's deep personal struggle with our first principle, which I think is something we can all relate to. Because this is what happens in the real world, when our ideals seem so far away from the present reality. So much so that we begin to call those ideals into question. Fortunately for us, questioning is part of who we are and what we do. And that's a good thing. Now, I'm going to ask you to tell me, who has replaced Hitler in our minds as the evildoer of the moment? Putin, right? Right? Okay. Yeah, and I'm sure the list can go on and on. But yeah, Putin really comes to mind as the one who's replaced Hitler. His very existence right now calls our first principle into question in, I think, a rather large way, making it seem really pointless to debate the worth and dignity of Hitler. But with Putin's particular brand of evil, this brings this debate, it makes it fresh and current in the here and now. One of the major critiques of the UU faith tradition is that we don't handle evil very well, or we don't address it. We don't address it very well. We believe that people are inherently good, or at the very worst, maybe kind of neutral. And we believe that goodness and morals and ethics can also be nurtured into people and educated into our children. But yet, evil still exists. It exists in mass shooters, it exists in hate groups, and it exists in the many countless acts of violence, both the random ones and the planned ones. We can call evil a nature problem or a nurture problem or a mental health problem or the result of some really bad decisions. But no matter what we call it, evil flies in the face of our really open-hearted ideals of all people having inherent worth and dignity and having the ability to be good. And we UUs, for better or for worse, we don't really have the devil to blame for evil. We don't have the inherent sinfulness of humanity to pin the evil on, but yet it still exists, despite our best efforts to ignore it and to minimize it and to prevent it and protest it and punish it and fight it. Evil is not going anywhere anytime soon. So it's no wonder that our belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person might seem kind of wimpy and be subject to this sense of erosion, that it erodes within us, that was so openly confessed to in the reading, because it just doesn't always match up to our experience of the world as we come to know it. So here's how I look at our first principle. And it might be a cheat or a hack or a workaround, or not. I'll let you just decide on that. But I see the inherent worth and dignity. It means that everyone is born with worth and dignity built in. Right? That's the inherent part. Everyone is born with it, no matter who you are. And this inherent worth and dignity is totally separate from people's actions and behaviors in their lives. Inherent worth and dignity is like this gift we are presented with at birth. And it's also a gift we die with. But we may choose to use this worth and dignity wisely. We might use it to bless the world, or we may use it unwisely and destructively as a way to curse the world. One of my amateur definitions of evil is that evil is any act that is an assault upon the worth and dignity of another. So evil is the opposite of working against worth and dignity of another. For instance, the worth and dignity of all Ukrainians does not seem to mean much to Putin. And I would guess he's probably not concerned with human worth and dignity in general, except for his own and maybe a few of his friends. The invasion of Ukraine is an evil act. It tramples the peaceful lives of other human beings for nonsensical, non-understandable reasons. And to commit violence against or degrade any human being is a crime against worth and dignity, and it's evil. So my final answer is yes, Putin was born with the inherent worth and dignity that we all have, but he has chosen to do with this gift, what he's chosen to do with it is evil. And just because someone has inherent worth and dignity doesn't mean that they can't do bad things and they should not be held accountable. That accountability is really important. And honoring worth and dignity doesn't mean you have to agree with or excuse or honor bad behavior. It brings to me the phrase, what many of us would like to say to Putin, that at least can be said in public. You are better than this. You, fellow human being, should be better than this, right? Because of that inherent worth and dignity. You should be doing better than this. Despite its challenges, I believe our first principle is important because it's pro-human and promotes the fair and loving treatment of all people. Worth and dignity of every person. There's no hierarchies, there's no class, there's no caste involved. Every person is on equal footing. And isn't that the opposite of evil? So I will allow those who do evil deeds to have their inherent worth and dignity, even if they act with no regard for the worth and dignity of others. I'd rather concentrate on the worth and dignity that is being denied good people, rather than debate the worth and dignity of someone who is exceptionally inhumane. There's a minister named Reverend Barbara Hamilton Hallway. She once told a story about a congregant who was really distraught because she thought she could not be a good Unitarian Universalist because she was unable to believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It turns out this woman had been abused as a child, and she was unable to believe that her abuser had inherent worth and dignity. This very wise minister told the distraught woman that for now, maybe she should just focus on her own worth and dignity and believe in that. And she especially did not have to worry about the worth and dignity of her abuser. She said, "We have the whole community to hold that person's worth and dignity, so you don't have to." Unitarian Universalism does not ask the abused to uphold the worth and dignity of their abusers. Worth and dignity can be held in many ways. It can be held from a distance, and it can also be held by surrogates. We can also uphold someone's worth and dignity without admiration or agreement. We can, if we choose, still believe in and hope for redemption, not naively, but we can always leave the door open for the possibility, like Doug Mutter said. And we can believe in justice without the need to inflict unnecessary suffering on anyone in its name. And evil, there's a more practical side to evil, and I don't want to discount anything that Putin's doing, that's not my purpose, but evil can still, in our daily lives, be held in perspective. For those of us who are fortunate, hopefully the majority of us, evil is not something we are experiencing in our everyday life, personally. And I think it's really those everyday struggles with inherent worth and dignity that matter most when it comes to our first principle, because that's within our locus of control. For example, I don't run into Putin at the HEB, or hate groups while walking my dogs, or serial killers, knock on wood, while filling my gas tank. But what our lives are filled with are all sorts of interactions with people we know well, people we don't know at all. And I think this is where we should really be focusing our efforts towards worth and dignity, in our daily lives, in these smaller interactions, in this sphere where we have some element of control. And I know even this can be really challenging in and of itself. I mean, I'll tell you, when I have trouble with the first principle, it's when someone gets on my last nerve, right? Or even worse, it feels when I feel like I've been attacked or unfairly criticized. And isn't it interesting how perceived attacks on our own worth and dignity somehow erode our perception of the attacker's worth and dignity? So you can see how a downward spiral can happen. And this can be really fast, when these things happen, this descent into anger and dehumanization of those who antagonize or hurt us. Now, fortunately, for most of us, we might see red for a little while, and then we'll, our moments of not being able to see another's worth and dignity are short-lived. But then again, all those little hurts and those little grudges, all of these little things, they can really add up to a lot of serious worth and dignity erosion in our relationships. And no one is really happy. No one is happy if they're taken for granted or put down on a regular basis. And we human beings, we can trample on people's worth and dignity in so many ways without realizing it. And sadly, sometimes we tend to do it most to the people we love the most or who love us the most. Again, taking people for granted or being impatient or speaking harsh words. And then on a larger scale in society, this happens, this assault on worth and dignity happens, through all of the ugly isms and phobias out there that are way too many to name. We do it in these things called microaggressions, those little jabs and slights that tell someone they don't really belong or they're not worthy, that they are not one of us, and those little microaggressions, they add up. It can be a death by 1,000 cuts. And again, on the smaller scale, sometimes we can trample the worth and dignity of our parents. We can do it to our parents, we can do it to our kids. And we hope they will forgive us because we were tired and cranky or angry or just, flawed human beings. And sometimes if we're not trampling the worth and dignity of others through our actions, we're doing it in our heads, right? That's probably not a really healthy, internal mental process. And I also want to talk about our own personal worth and dignity. I mean, this can be really tricky. It's a very fine balance. a lot of us, we need to know that we are worthy, that we are valuable, that we are loved, that we have gifts that we can contribute to the world. Because, somewhere inside we don't believe it ourselves. And we might not believe it ourselves because we've been mistreated, or we're feeling guilty, or we're stuck in a difficult past, or navigating a difficult present, or facing an uncertain future. Feelings of worthlessness are all too common. Then you can take this situation of personal worth and dignity to the opposite extreme. Did you know that sociopaths have extraordinarily high self-esteem? Right? Certain narcissists do as well. Don't crack up the minister, please. But if you have too good a sense of personal worth and dignity, that can be dangerous, especially if your sense of worth and dignity is so high that it's, it's at the expense of the worth and dignity of others. So, church is a place. Church is a place, through our religion, through our spiritual practice, through our relationships, we can work on this balance. How to know our own worth and dignity, and how to affirm it in others, to help those whose worth and dignity have been trampled. Church is a great practice ground for this, by speaking honestly and respectfully and compassionately, and treating people as the great gifts they are to our humanity and to our world. So yes, our first principle can be frustratingly idealistic, and could, some might want to call it naive and unrealistic, but I really believe it's important and it is necessary. And it can be a cherished value without being an absolute. We don't have a lot of absolutes in Unitarian Universalism. We do see those shades of gray. And why worry over Putin's dignity when the dignity of so many other people is at risk, and we have more power to do something about it? And plus, if we don't have the first principle full of ideals that challenge us and drive us to greater wholeness, what are we here for? And though we may continually struggle with the first principle, there's something that's a lot worse, and I think that would be not having the principle. The absence of that principle, I think, would be really bad. Imagine if we did not recognize the worth and dignity of every person. Who would we be? And how would we be? Does that feel like wrong to you? Like, no, we don't believe that all people have worth and dignity. Meh, some people do, others don't. That sets us up for all sorts of evil, doesn't it? Right? Believing that certain human beings, just because of the conditions under which they were born, don't have worth and dignity. I know that's a church I personally would not join. So I think this principle is so ingrained into our Unitarian Universalist faith that, without it, I don't think we would be us, and we would not be our Unitarian Universalist selves. Amen, and blessed be.